This hearing will come to order. I wish you a good afternoon. The Subcommittee on Energy and Environment meets today for a report on the Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite, or GAOs program. Satellites, which have been serving America since 1975, watch over the whole Western Hemisphere from their positions 22,300 miles above the Earth. They send back the pictures that your local weather reporter shows you every night. Those satellites provide the dramatic pictures of hurricanes that we all see when these storms are churning toward the coast. They enable forecasters to alert us that severe weather is on the way. It's the weather satellite no one wants to be without, especially those of us who represent coastal areas. Designing and flying satellites is a difficult business, and even with years of experience, there are always frustrations in bringing new ones into service. In the early 1990s, the General Accounting Office told Congress that the generation of GAOs satellites then in development was in serious trouble. The instruments were behind schedule. The program cost had more than doubled, and it still was not clear when the satellites would be launched. At least today, we are not in the position of having the last GAOs satellite in orbit with its fuel tanks almost empty. Last year, NOAA Administrator Lautenbacher told us that the GAOs program cost estimates had almost doubled. And in order to bring them back within the agency's limited budget, he was cutting the number of satellites in half and eliminating one of the major instruments. An independent review team took issue with NOAA's intent to manage the GAOs program by itself, questioning whether there were enough people in the agency who know how to handle satellite design and development. The Earth Science Decadal Survey, issued earlier this year by the National Research Council, urged NOAA to find a way to recover the capability represented by the eliminated sensor. Our GAO team recommended a full-scale review of the Advanced Baseline Imager, the primary sensor, and bolstering the agency's management capability. NOAA has been responding to all this advice, as Mr. Kicza will explain in her Ms. Kicza will explain in her testimony. Pardon me. The agency decided that it did have to ask NASA for help, and has given its sister agency the responsibility to manage those elements of the GAOs program that will fly in space. It will apply its own special expertise to the ground side of the program. It has brought over NASA staff to supplement its own program and project managers. It completed the review of the Advanced Baseline Imager. Today it is at the point where the decision has to be made to buy GAOs R. That makes it a good time to see where we are. Powner from GAO has some important messages to bring out in his statement. It appears that the program cost estimate will be around $8 billion by the time that we receive the President's budget request this year. And this is some $1 billion more than the estimate Admiral Lautenbacher gave us last year. That's not a good trend. It concerns me to find out that we are operating with both an acting program director and an acting deputy program director, and that NOAA's first attempt to fill the deputy slot couldn't find someone for the job. There appears to be strong disagreement between our witnesses about the relationship between NOAA and NASA in terms of managing the space segment of the GAOs program. I trust Ms. Kicza will discuss that with us. The chair of NOAA's independent review team, Tom Young, knows from his own experience and many reviews of what went wrong in other satellite programs where to look to figure out how well a project like GAOs is progressing. He has told us that the opportunity to get GAOs right is there. So I hope today's hearing will keep GAOs moving in the right direction. I thank you for being here, and I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Inglis, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing on the Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellites R Series. This hearing continues close oversight of this vital weather satellite program, oversight that started in the last Congress. Last September, the Government Accountability Office came before the Science Committee to report on the status of GAOs R series procurement. GAO also made recommendations on how to proceed so as to avoid any further cost overruns while ensuring that technological development stays on schedule. More than a year later, we're meeting again with witnesses from GAO and NOAA to discuss the status of the GAOs program. However, there are disagreements this time around about GAO's assessment of where program development stands. I look forward to hearing if and why NOAA disagrees with GAO's assessment that the project cost will be nearly $2 billion more than last year's outlook, and why the satellites may not be ready for launch until as late as 2017. I'm particularly concerned that possible launch delays will result in discontinuity of valuable forecasting data, the kind of data that the chairman was just referencing. If GAOs fails to launch until 2017 and doesn't come online until 2019, will NASA, NOAA, and weather forecasters lose access to the information they need to accurately predict and observe storms? Those of us responsible for this program, Congress, NOAA, and NASA, cannot lightly allow delays and cost overruns. GAOs today is a $6.9 billion program for 2 satellites. That's a lot of taxpayer money. We expect that investment to provide a series of weather satellites that are launched on time and provide data to ensure the most accurate possible weather forecasting and modeling. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. English. I ask unanimous consent that all additional opening statements submitted by subcommittee members may be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. It is my pleasure today to introduce our witnesses, Mr. David Powner, who is the Director of Information Technology Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. He is the head of the GAO team that has supported the subcommittee's oversight of NOAA's major satellite programs for the last 5 years. And Ms. Mary Ellen Kisa is the Assistant Administrator for our Satellite and Information Services and leads the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information Systems, NESDIS, at NOAA, which operates both the geostationary and polar constellations of weather satellites. We welcome both of you. You'll each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing, and when all 2 of you have completed your testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. Mr. Powner, we'll begin with you, please.
Chairman Lansom, Ranking Member Inglis, and members of the subcommittee, we appreciate the opportunity to testify this afternoon on our GAOs report completed at your request. Your early oversight, Mr. Chairman, has been essential to ensure that NOAA is effectively planning for this critical satellite acquisition. Today, as requested, I will provide an update on the GAOs current cost and schedule estimate, our assessment of whether NOAA is adequately addressing key technical and programmatic risks, and recommendations going forward. Last September, when we testified before you, Mr. Chairman, we discussed GAOs as a 4-satellite program costing over $6 billion and the cost and scope uncertainties. Specifically, the cost was approaching $12 billion, double the original estimate. Since that time, the program dropped the complex sensor, decreased the number of satellites from 4 to 2, and revised its life cycle cost estimate to $7 billion with the launch of the first satellite in 2014. As the program approaches critical contract award dates next year, the program cost estimates are growing and schedules are being extended. Independent studies estimate that the 2-satellite program will cost about $2 billion more than the current $7 billion program, and the first satellite is to be delayed 2 years. Reasons for the differences between the independent estimate and NOAA's estimate include differences in government costs, the space and ground segments, and different assumptions regarding inflation. No one commenting on our draft report told us that the revised estimate is likely to go up $1 billion and have about a year delay. However, this revised estimate is not expected to be released until February of next year with the President's 2009 budget. 2 points regarding the cost estimate. First, most satellite programs overrun even the most conservative independent cost estimate. And second, we remain concerned that an estimate is being developed more based on how acceptable it is in the next budget cycle rather than whether it is a true reflection of what the program will cost. Turning to risks. NOAA has established a solid risk management program. Specifically, it has identified key risks and put in place mitigation plans. For example, key risks include the lack of an integrated master schedule and technical risks associated with the ABI sensor. However, we found several areas for improvement. We found inconsistencies among GAOs' different risk lists. For example, the ground segment identified interdependencies among the space and ground segments as a key risk, but the space nor the overall program identified this. We therefore recommended that NOAA use a program-wide list that is reconciled with other risk activities. NOAA acknowledged that this is needed and now has an updated program-wide risk list. We also found that several important key risks were not being acknowledged and made recommendations that NOAA acknowledge these risks, develop mitigation plans, and report the status of these key risks to senior executives. These risks include key leadership positions that need to be filled, NOAA's limited insight into NASA's deliverables, and the early depletion of management reserves. Expanding on each of these. 2 senior GAOs program positions. The System Program Director and the Deputy Director are currently filled by personnel in acting capacities. NOAA is working aggressively to fill these positions. In prior GAOs acquisitions, an issue with NOAA's limited insight into the portions of the procurement managed by NASA. During our review, we heard that this continues to be an issue, in particular when it comes to NOAA's ability to review key cost and schedule information for the space segment that NASA is responsible for. NOAA disagreed with our assessment recommendation in this area and has reported an unparalleled level of transparency between the 2 agencies. Given the past problems NOAA has experienced obtaining insights into NASA's contracts, we believe that NOAA should acknowledge this risk and manage it appropriately. We also remain concerned about the early depletion of management reserves at the early stage of this acquisition. NOAA has downplayed the risk, stating that their overall program reserve is consistent with best practices. We, however, believe that this should be managed aggressively since it is likely to result in increased program costs. In summary, Mr. Chairman, NOAA is positioning itself to more effectively manage the GAOs acquisitions. However, moving forward, a realistic cost and schedule estimate is needed, as is even more aggressive risk management. This concludes my statement. Thank you for your oversight of this important satellite acquisition.
Thank you, Mr. Powner. Ms. Kisa.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I am Mary Kisa, Assistant Administrator for the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information Service within National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Today we're here to talk about NOAA's Next Generation Geostationary Satellite Program, GAOs. As you said, GAOs spacecraft are critical to hurricane and other severe weather forecasting because they are constantly taking images and collecting data above the United States. We have 2 geostationary satellites operating in space, one over the East Coast and one over the West Coast. We do maintain a spare satellite in orbit in case of any problems with the operational satellites. We've just launched GAOs-N, our current on-orbit spare, and we're finishing building 2 satellites, O and P, which will launch and provide data until GAOs is launched in 2014. We are in the final design phase of GAOs. We plan to release requests for proposals in early 2008 and to award contracts for building the new satellites and ground systems by the end of 2008. GAOs remains on track for a 2014 launch to maintain continuity for the GAOs-N series. My written testimony details significant changes we've made to strengthen our management of the GAOs program. We maintain overall program management responsibility with NOAA for GAOs. NASA manages the flight project, which includes building and integrating the instruments and the spacecraft and procuring the launch vehicle. NOAA manages the ground system project, which includes all ground stations and algorithm development. These changes place the government in a direct oversight role for each of the key elements of the GAOs program, the spacecraft, the instruments, and the supporting ground systems. We have instituted specific metrics and milestones to ensure problems are quickly identified and fixed. We continue to have outside independent experts look at our program, and we will make changes as necessary. NOAA continues to value the insight and reviews by GAO, and I'd like to respond to the recommendations in the recent GAO report. As David said, recommendation number 1 relates to assuring that risks highlighted in one area are examined for their potential program-wide implications. NOAA agrees with this recommendation and has already begun to implement a consolidated risk list that the GOES-R System Program Director regularly reviews. The NOAA Program Management Council is briefed monthly on the top risks and the strategies for resolving and closing these risks. Recommendation number 2 directs that NOAA add the following risks to the program-wide risk list. These include unfilled or temporary GOES-R program leadership positions, insufficient program insight on NASA contract performance, and insufficient management reserve on the critical advanced baseline imager instrument and at the GOES-R program level. NOAA agrees with highlighting the risk associated with filling the leadership positions. The GAO in their draft report had highlighted 3 vacancies as being of concern. 1 has been filled. The remaining 2 are in the final decision stages. The status of filling key vacancies is tracked on a weekly basis at the staff level and formally reviewed on a monthly basis at NOAA's Program Management Council meeting. The GOES-R program is currently being led full-time by Ms. Abigail Harper. She's my Deputy Assistant Administrator for Systems Acquisitions. Ms. Harper is highly qualified with multiple years' experience in satellite systems acquisitions and in satellite systems safety and mission assurance. Meanwhile, NOAA has expedited its search for the GOES-R Systems Program Director. I have completed all of the interviews of the highly qualified candidates and will be forwarding my selection to Vice Admiral Lautenbacher within the week. We do not fully understand GAO's concern with respect to NOAA's insight into NASA's performance. We do have unprecedented insight into NASA contract performance. Our GOES-R program is co-located at NASA Goddard with the flight project and the ground project. Our program interacts with the projects on a daily basis. Additionally, we have a comprehensive management control plan which clearly outlines roles, responsibilities, authorities, and reporting requirements. Regarding the recommendation highlighting the reserve posture as a risk, NOAA believes there are sufficient reserves on the Advanced Baseline Imager instrument and at the program level. When the GAO had reviewed the program earlier this year, the program had not yet allocated the management reserves to the project level. We were holding it at the program level. This may have led to an incorrect interpretation by the GAO as to the reserve posture. The program does maintain a budget that reflects at least a 25% management reserve. Today, the GOES-R program maintains reserve at both the program level and the project level, and we believe that these reserves are sufficient to manage risks. We also have concerns about GAO cost and schedule assertions. We've worked hard to reconcile the independent estimate with the program estimate. Early in the cost estimation efforts, the 2 estimates did diverge in several areas due to differing assumptions. As a part of the reconciliation process, the program estimate has in fact increased, and the independent estimate has decreased. The estimates are now within 12% of each other. The independent estimator has indicated that the program estimate represents a reasonable cost estimate at this stage of the development. The updated cost estimate is, in fact, informing our 2009 budget process. Additionally, the independent estimator has also indicated that the 2 schedules are essentially in agreement with each other within the capability of current modeling schedule estimating models to predict. In concluding, I want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Powner for the recommendations offered. We are taking appropriate action to respond to the concerns, and I do appreciate the committee's continued interest in NOAA's satellite programs. We're strengthening our management of these programs. We do have a fully functioning operational satellite with backup systems in place, and we're pleased to be working on the next generation GOES-R. At this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kisa. We have a vote. And I don't know why we have that goofy alarm. Somebody made the decision they liked it, I guess. We're going to continue to go forward and see how far we can get through this. So let me begin with Mr. Powner. NOAA uses an 80% confidence level in its cost estimating. My understanding is that leaves a 20% chance that the quoted cost will be exceeded. So the cost numbers reported for GOES represents floors, not ceilings, right?
Correct. Well, there's a chance that at 80% confidence level, there's a 20% chance it actually could go up or down, is really what it says. So typically it's always going up, so correct. Does the estimate give a limit to the possible program cost? It does not give a limit, no.
Ms. Kisa, according to the comments NOAA submitted to GAO, the most conservative estimates at the 80% confidence intervals bring the program office estimate within 12% of the independent cost estimate, or $1.032 billion below the ICE. The ICE is $9.3 billion. This implies that the program office estimate is now $8.3 billion. This is $1 billion above NOAA's estimate at last year's hearing. And I assume that this will be the cost estimate reported in the President's budget estimate in February.
No, sir, I'm not sure how you're working your math, but right now our current program office estimate is between $7 and $8 billion, and that's within the 12% of the current independent estimate. I believe the independent cost estimate numbers came down from what you may have earlier quoted.
Where will we find that additional billion? Last year was 7. And
we were at $6.9 billion with the President's FY 2008 budget. And as we had indicated last year, we still had to go through the independent cost estimate and reconcile. And that's, in fact, the process we're going through.
Okay, so that number is going to be a higher number. Will that?
The number that we're dealing with now is the current program office estimate is higher than the 6.9. It's between 7 and 8 billion, and that's part of our FY 2009 discussions.
And that'll be in the President's budget
Yes,
in February.
Sir.
Will NOAA be getting the additional money to cover that?
As I've indicated, we're in dialogue with the administration on what we believe is an appropriate budget for the GAOs program. I think we have good rationale for indicating the need for the additional budget. We are budgeting at the 80% cost confidence level, and we think that's a reasonable approach to take at this stage of the program.
Mr. Powner, in your experience, which of the cost estimates is the most believable, and why?
Well, if you look at it from a historical perspective, and just to clarify this, there's right now it's 6.9, and the independent cost estimate was at 9.3, and that's in our report. And you'll see allegations that NOAA disagrees with that statement. All we were reporting was what the independent cost estimators came up with. Now, clearly, there's this reconciliation that's going on right now. No one has seen that, okay? So we hear it's between 7 and 8, but we haven't seen that. Historically, if you look at NPOs and these other satellite acquisitions, the independent cost estimate becomes a reality, or typically it's exceeded. So hopefully, we're all hopeful that NOAA's right and we're at a lower cost. But if you look historically, we're in the ballpark of the 9.3 with the independent cost estimator.
You want to comment?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think we all agree that we should be budgeting at the 80% cost confidence level. That's the right thing to do at this phase in the game, and we particularly want to get a sound cost estimate before we get the major contractors on board. We have an 80% cost estimate at the program office level. The independent cost estimator had an 80% cost estimate. The reconciliation process is an approach of understanding the differences between the two cost estimates, seeing where they converge, and then coming forward with what we believe is a rational cost estimate to be presenting in the President's FY 2009 budget. We won't exactly reconcile, but for every area that we don't specifically reconcile on, we'll have a good reason for why we believe our number is the better number.
Powner, how should Congress react when it receives these differing cost estimates? How do we assure that the cost estimating process gives us an accurate estimate of the likely program cost and not an estimate trying to stay within a figure likely to be approved by OMB?
Well, I think the key is to look at where the differences lie and whether the assumptions and rationale on those differences make sense from an oversight perspective. Clearly, we don't know exactly where those are at the moment, But if you look at like independent cost estimators, whether it's GAOs or NPOs, they typically look at historical data. It's more heavily influenced by historical data. There's a lot of other information internal to the program that only Ms. Kisa and her staff has right now that are driving these decisions. And I think from an oversight perspective, whether it's yourself or GAO helping you with that, we really need to look at those assumptions and whether they're reasonable.
Thanks. Mr. Inglis.
Ms. Kisa, I guess it's, if I'm understanding this right, you think that the independent estimate is $7 to $8 billion, right?
The program office estimate is between $7 and $8 billion, and it represents what the program believes is a sound 80% cost confidence estimate.
And the independent estimate is?
The independent estimate will be a little bit higher than that. In those areas where there are differences, we will explain the differences and the rationale for why we believe the estimate that we're coming forward with is a correct estimate. I'd like to take the opportunity to also say that we're not trying to bring in an estimate that the administration will accept. We're bringing in an estimate that we believe is a sound estimate to execute the program successfully.
And what's the process by which you're going to explain those differences? When will that be? And or can you tell us now what the differences are?
I can tell you where the key areas of difference are, yes. It's in the amount of maturity of the software. So you'll see some deltas in the software development area. You'll see some deltas in the area of instrument development and some deltas in the area of systems engineering. In all cases, the program estimate increased its estimate and believe we have a sound basis for the numbers that we've identified in our estimate.
And when is that? When do you intend to make those explanations available with specificity?
We can make them available as part of the 09 budget process, and we are also having that independently looked at by our independent review team.
Which I guess is driving some of the chairman's questions about what. That sounds like it's connected to the budget process.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
But then I guess that brings up the possibility of being fit into the budget process. I think is at least the theory that the chairman is pursuing, and that it's not really reflecting what's happening in the program. It reflects rather the budget exigencies rather than the program's natural expenses.
At this point, what we have delivered is a budget that we believe is a rational budget at the 80% cost confidence level, and I have no indication that would be anything other than that.
How about the time to estimate differences, or the time to completion? What's the delivery dates? What's the discrepancy there? You're thinking that it's going to be operational when?
We plan to have it available for launch for the December 2014 timeframe. We've had that looked at, both internal and external of the program. I think it's a rational launch date to proceed to with sufficient schedule reserve. What the independent estimator has indicated is that within the ability of the current models to predict, the two estimates are essentially the same.
So the independent analysis agrees with your analysis, 2014.
Within the ability of models to predict. So they're saying it could be as much as a year later than what we are, but the models are not, they don't have a high enough fidelity to be able to discern between those two dates.
So you're saying 2014, they may be saying 2015.
Yes, sir.
I wonder where I get the 2017 number. You have any idea?
It was an earlier point in the independent process. So through the reconciliation process, we've reduced that delta.
Yes, can I clarify that? Yeah. 2014, 6.9 2014 was the current estimate. The independent assessors came up with the 9.3 cost and then about a 2-year delay into the 2017 timeframe. So when we heard back from NOAA on our report, what they told us that they anticipated, instead of a $2 billion overrun and a 2-year delay, a $1 billion overrun and a 1-year delay. Now today we're hearing a 2014 delivery. So we're a little confused because at one time we were 2 billion more and 2 out, and then they replied back 1 billion more and only 1 out instead of 2. And today I'm here in 2014, so we probably need to get that cleared up. But what we have was an original estimate, 2014, in the independent assessment, and the rest of this is just kind of in the fog, Ranking Member Inglis, because we don't see any data on that.
What I'll clarify is what we've provided back is where the independent estimate is coming in versus what I've been talking about is the program estimate. So the independent estimate went from 9.2 in 2 years down to a 1 year beyond where we are estimated. Similarly, both in cost and schedule, the independent estimate through the reconciliation process has come down. And from our perspective, the program office estimate in terms of cost has increased in part of the reconciliation process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have only 2.5 minutes left before our vote. We will have to be in recess until we make those votes. There are 3, 1 15-minute, which is almost over, and 2 5, so we'll be coming back, and we do have just a few more questions. We're in recess.
Good afternoon. I don't look like Nick Lampson, but I'm Gabrielle Giffords, and this meeting is officially resumed. Just following up on the Congressman's questions, this question is for Ms. Kicza. Has NOAA yet made a final decision to purchase the GAOs?
I think it's very important to remember that we're still in the formulation phase for GAOs. This is the time when we're trying to settle on the cost, the scope, and the schedule. We have not yet made the decision to go out and procure those major contracts for ground and space segments. We're approaching that decision now.
Okay. And a pretty basic question. With what we know now, is it better to invest the limited resources in geostationary weather satellites by reopening the line of existing satellites, expensive though it may be, or to continue with the developing of the new technologies with GAOs with the threat of the constantly rising costs that could possibly leave us without those improved capabilities?
That's a really good question, and in fact, when we were going through a series of options that we were examining last summer as a part of this effort, we looked at whether or not it would be cost-effective to look at simply duplicating the GAOs N series, which is the current line. And what we found is that because of the mission design life for that series, you'd have to buy 3 spacecraft, where with GAOs you have to buy 2. You would not have the capability, but it would be a comparable cost. And it would still require the same approach. You still have to go out with a new procurement. So we didn't see any schedule benefit, no cost benefit, and we would lose the cost we'd already sunk into the development for GAOs.
There's also reality that NOAA is already struggling with a second highly complex satellite program. That the level of resources does not appear to be able to meet the needs of both programs simultaneously. What, therefore, is the best course of action to pursue, assuming that there's no sudden influx or increase of funds for NOAA?
Right now, the NPOS program, the Polar Orbiting Satellite Series, is a joint program with NOAA and DoD. We each share half of the cost of that development, and it is fully funded at this point in time. The only area where we are working for an updated cost estimate is on GAOs-R. Both satellite series are needed to support our operational weather forecasting capability.
So let me just get the clarification. So you believe that you can accomplish both with the funds that you currently have available to you?
We are increasing the cost estimate for GAOs-R, and the NPOS program is currently fully funded.
And how much is that increase going to be for?
We've indicated that it's, right now we're at $6.9 billion. The increase is between, to bring it up between $7 and $8 billion.
Powner, with all the work that you've been asked to do in your area, offer some recommendations?
A couple key areas that I'd like to highlight in terms of perhaps where we even had some disagreements is on the management reserve. At this early stage of this program, I think if you look at the independent review team recommendations on GAOs, the recommendation was that we have a 25% management reserve. That was the target. When we completed our report, the management reserve had decreased for the program now overall down to 15%. We heard today it's now back up to 15% with the renegotiating of numbers. It's important that we maintain an adequate management reserve because there's a lot of technical complexity involved here, and that really needs to be looked at. The other thing that we feel strongly about, and we've had some disagreements, Ms. Kisa and I have discussed this, is the insights into NASA's activities. Historically, that has been a problem on these prior GAOs satellite acquisitions. We have heard this afternoon, that there's unparalleled transparency and the two agencies are working together well. But also when I read Ms. Kisa's statement, I see comments in here that there are frameworks being established so that we can have the appropriate insight and guidance. We still need to work on that and keep that on our radar screen to make sure we have adequate insights into NASA's activities.
Powner, would you recommend more GAOs satellites or go forward with the GAOs-R?
We would need to see, that's a very good question. Two things. We would need to see two things in order to answer that question. One, we would want to know exactly what the cost of GAOs-R is to be. We hear it's between 7 and 8. We hear that independent cost estimators say it could be as high as 9.3. Historically, those independent estimates have come true. Resurrecting the prior Q satellite, we hear that we understand you have to start assembly lines and the whole bit, but exactly what that would cost, we don't have any firm number. So you would need that cost, the actual cost of GAOs-R, and have a true cost-benefit analysis and determine what's best going forward.
And when do you think we're going to have those numbers by?
Well, what we heard this afternoon is we will not have a current GAOs-R estimate until the President's budget comes out in the February timeframe. In terms of resurrecting the Q option, I don't believe that that's in the works right now.
Congressman Inglis, I'm going to turn the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see. Ms. Kicza, in your testimony and testimony, Mr. Powner, you mentioned the splitting of the acquisition contract into a flight segment and a ground segment. And what was the rationale behind splitting the two aspects of the acquisition contract?
Okay. Over the course of the last year, we've done a lot of examination of the current contracting structures resident within NOAA, examination of recent reports, both IG and GAO, about the pros and cons of different contracting strategies. And we had our own independent review team led by Tom Young, who offered recommendations. We made the decision to go from a single systems prime to split contracts to assure that we had government oversight on every key element of the GAOs-R system, the spacecraft, the ground systems, and the instruments. We believe, and that is also very consistent with the way our primary partner, NASA Goddard, has traditionally done this type of acquisition. So the acquisition allows us to benefit from each agency's core competencies. It is consistent with our partners' traditional use, and it provides direct government oversight on all the key elements. All of those we felt were reasonable reasons to proceed with a change in the contracting and management strategy.
Now, GAO says that the splitting of the contracts caused delays in the program. Do you find that to be the case?
We did have some delay as a result, about 3 to 6 months in terms of extending the current PDRR contracts so we could get additional information, and then revving up our own capability internally. So yes, we did have some delay. As a result of that, we also uncovered some things that I think we would not have otherwise seen, and have been able to take action in preparing for the major acquisitions.
Mr. Powner, you have any comment on those things?
The only comment is that the short delay extending the awarding of those contracts, that probably makes sense because those preliminary design reviews and those meetings for those key decision points are very critical going forward. I think historically when you look at NPOs, a lot of times we push decisions through rather quickly instead of actually having a real solid design review and the critical technical reviews prior. So that delay makes sense.
Ms. Kisa was just, Ms. Giffords was just mentioning the Q line and the possibility of resurrecting that line. Is that current technology or is it outdated technology?
Let me talk a little bit about that. The original series, NONP, was an NONPQ. We had planned for 4 satellites. In 2003, we made the decision not to exercise that option on that procurement, and for good reasons. We ended up getting a more powerful launch vehicle that allowed us to extend the lifetime of the NOP spacecraft. That option is no longer available to us, so we would have to go out with a separate procurement. So we would have to go out and procure new spacecraft. The instruments aren't there. We would have to go build new instruments again. And so we didn't find, and we would have to build 3 spacecraft as opposed to 2 spacecraft, which is what we've got with a 10-year mission life on GAOs. We went through that analysis last year as part of the decision to go from 4 to 2. We did a wide number of options on where we should go, and the continuity of the N series was one of the options that we examined.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Powner, your report seems to state that NOAA can't discuss both the cost and also the schedule data directly with contractors on the space segment. Why do you think that the GAO considers that such a significant issue?
Well, I think there's processes that are currently being established right now so that NOAA does have insights into what's going on from the NASA component of this. That's very important. If you look at, for instance, if you compare this to the NPOS program, where we have joint program with NOAA and DoD, and the scrubbing of some of that cost and schedule data from the contractors, that has proven a very effective best practice, even down to a point where they scrub that data on a weekly basis, and they get ahead of the curve and anticipate problems with both cost and schedule. Something like that would be a good model to consider with the GAOs program.
Ms. Kisa, did the management documents that you described in your testimony give NOAA, the managers, the authority to obtain any data they believe is needed to manage the GAOs program?
Yes, in fact, the way the program is structured, the program office manages the cost data that comes in, and we matrix that support into the project, so we have complete insight into what's going on with the contracts, how they're performing in terms of cost and schedule. I agree with David that we really need to keep a close eye and a firm handle on insight into how the contractors are performing. I believe we have that at this point in time. We were talking about it before we started the hearing. We have to make sure that we keep our eyes on it. We don't let it get out of our sight, because then it should become a risk. Right now, I personally don't believe it's a risk because we do have eyes on it. And so that was my rationale for not agreeing. It's not to say it's not important to keep a good close eye on how the contractors are performing, whether that be on the space segment side, which is NASA's, or on the ground segment side, which is NOAA's.
One final question. The disagreement in your statements considering management of program reserves, to me, focuses on how the reserves are distributed. But isn't it really a question of whether there will be sufficient reserves to carry the program to its conclusion? Ms. Kisa, you said that it will, but Mr. Powner says that the Advanced Baseline Imager already made a hefty call on reserves and still has 40% of its work remaining. Should this committee be concerned that you will run out of reserves, as happened with the NPOS program?
As I'd indicated in my testimony, right now we're developing an estimate, or have an estimate, which keeps 25% management reserve overall on the program. In fact, more than that. We have, at the time that Mr. Powner's team was looking at it, they did not see that reserve posture because we had not allocated it down to the project. So they saw a small amount of reserve on the instrument contract. They saw no reserve at the project level. Since that time, we've allocated reserve. We have 25% on the flight project, 30% on the ground project. We require the flight project manager to maintain a minimum of 20% unleaned reserved on cost to go, and we actually visually check that on a monthly basis at my level. I can see where his liens are and whether or not he's keeping that threshold that we think is best business practices.
But is the total reserve left to carry through, is going to be left to carry through to the next program?
No, no, it's not going to carry through. The reason you put reserve on the programs is you expect you will expend it by the time you launch. But you always want to have it there because when you need it, you need to have ready access.
Okay, but it is going to get us to the launch then?
Yes, absolutely, and beyond. We have reserve posture for the operational operation of those satellites as well.
Okay. Let me just follow up with one last question. Does the contractor for the Advanced Baseline Imager have any of its own money set aside for reserves?
The contractor does keep a small reserve, but traditionally with the way NASA manages contracts, they tend to keep very little reserve in the contract and they hold it at the project level, and then they control the allocation back to the contract when it's time to do so.
Do we know how much of that reserve exists?
As I said, right now they're at 25% and they're expected to keep 20% unleaned on cost to go, and that's being maintained.
Just one more question, Madam Chair, and that is, Ms. Kisa, the Senate included language in the CJS appropriations bill that would require a non-McCarty type review for NOAA in the event of cost overruns, and the House passed similar language in the last Congress, but there's some differences between those provisions, and maybe you could tell us how those provisions would affect NOAA's ability to manage programs like GAOs.
Yes, and actually I appreciate the question. First of all, I want to indicate that I appreciate that type of congressional oversight, and I think it's entirely appropriate for Congress to hold us accountable to deliver spacecraft on cost, on schedule, and within program scope. As you noted, the Senate has an amendment out. The House has recently passed an amendment relative to NASA. I'd like to indicate that the Senate amendment does pose some difficulties for us. First of all, it would propose baselining the program at last year's cost estimate. Typically in spacecraft acquisition, you baseline a program in terms of performance measurements and measuring against baseline at the time of PDR. We are not there yet. We're about 1.5 years away from that. So I fully expect to be baselined and measured against baseline. We need to make sure it's the right baseline to be measured against. Senate amendment also has a prohibition on spending current and prior year funds until the certification process is completed. And so they would basically turn off the fund faucet while we're certifying in the event we say we're going to have a cost overrun. That would basically halt the program in its tracks and prevent us from being able to launch up. We are concerned about that. We have looked at the NASA language. We find that language to be more consistent with what we would expect in a satellite acquisition system. And as I said from the get-go, we expect to be held accountable for delivering the program.
Questions?
Kisa, would you please submit for the record the following documents? The June 15th Memorandum of Understanding between NOAA and NASA for the GOSAR program. Also the GOSAR Management Control Plan, and the report submitted from the independent review team to NOAA except the January 3rd, 2007 report that has already been provided.
Absolutely.
In closing, the subcommittee would like to wish fair weather to Captain Garner Yates, who's with us today, of the NOAA Commissioned Corps, who's retiring from federal service this Friday. Captain Yates has served as NOAA's congressional liaison for satellite issues for a very long time, and we know that this has not been an easy job in the past few years, but our staff is going to miss you, and we thank you for your service to the federal government. I'd also like to thank all of you for appearing before the subcommittee this afternoon. Under the rules of the committee, the record will be held open for 2 weeks for members to submit additional statements and any additional questions they might have for witnesses. If there's no further questions, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.